Hi, my name is Sean, and I'll be joining you live in Chicago at the Autism 2024 Symposium. I'll be talking about two sessions that I'll be running. Um, and it's always weird when you guys are joining me here in my humble abode of a home because you can see all my artwork around. But no, I really hope you join us in Chicago. And I'm going to talk a little bit about motivational interviewing today, something which those of you who are returning might have heard me talk something about years ago. And then I'm going to talk a lot about autistic bodily wisdom because that's kind of where my heart is these days. So let's start off with motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is a counseling strategy, right? Um, and it's interesting because 4 years ago when I gave this talk, I was rolling out my first course on MI and autism and high functioning adults. And so, really, the center of it being person centered, which is funny because in 4 years that we've been doing this, there's now a bigger, richer research base. And so, really, this talk I'll give is really about being person centered and how has the literature evolved. It's evolving to the point that there are starting to be copyrights and patents around it, and there's research coming out of Mayo Clinic Health Systems, which I was involved in, and there are other healthcare systems which are doing really use of MI as an approach to working with um, to really working with family, right? I mean, the thing about motivational interviewing is we know so much about it now. It's really the spirit that makes MI effective with just about any population. It's those drivers that sort of we wouldn't think of, but the values of, um, I got to actually pull them up. But the values of motivational interviewing are really what make it work. It's not, I mean, yes, it's a method, and we'll talk about the method, but I'm really more concerned with for those that come out of my um, practice of is really about pace, partnership, acceptance, collaboration, and evoking. It's really that spirit that makes the thing work. It makes it come through. It makes your clinical practice shine, and people can really have a sense of that or not. And it doesn't take that long to learn. So that's sort of one lane of this, right? So we'll spend some time on that. We'll spend time talking about the research updates, and we'll really talk about how the work of MI and autism is just expanded. And perhaps what's more important to me is actually that you come to my bodily based um, wisdom class where we reframe stimming through a sensory motor psychotherapy lens. Um, so, to give you some background on what that is, sensory motor psychotherapy is a body based trauma therapeutic approach created by Pat Ogden, Janina Fisher, and Kakuni Minton in roughly the mid 90s when these modalities in trauma were coming about, right? Like in the 80s when Pat was creating it. And really beginning to work on how we treat trauma in the body, um, it was kind of a different place in time and space than it is now to establish an evidence based treatment, especially in the world of autism, right? And you're probably wondering, okay, Sean, so why are you talking about trauma if you're talking about autism, right? Well, to the nervous system in the body of being an autistic person, trauma and autism are not very different to the way the body responds. The heart goes a lot faster, and people who are chronically traumatized, it also goes a lot faster in people with autism. And not only do we see that in cardiac profiles in people with autism, we see that in um, just the way the bodies are wired, right? So we see bodies wired with less oxytocin and less vasopressin. And we see differences in neuroanatomy that really support this polyvagal view of being an autistic person and really needing to work with the body. A lot of the body's cues to the self, right, to the autistic self, really have a lot to do with like go fast, go fast, go fast, right? This is threat. And when you think about it, right, you think about where autistic people come from, there's just this real space of like, we're really good at these niche things, right? And so part of that is an evolutionary adaptation, right? About 300,000 years ago, when you have this split of, sorry, I got to move this thing. When you have this split, right, you have groups of people kind of, and then you have autistic people kind of, sort of this split, right? In social, like we're going to become a more social society, and I'm not so sure. And that's something that's carried through on the nervous system. But what's valuable about that is it teaches us that people with autism, while tend to be loners, also tend to be really good at things. And so when we look at what we call stimming behaviors, this restrictive repetitive pattern of interest or behavior, right? Sometimes those can be just turned ever so slightly. And so when we turn those ever so slightly, we can look at them through the lens of the body. And so what we're going to do in my session is we're going to learn how do you turn those stimming behaviors using a strengths-based polyvagal lens in the sensory motor way, right? Like to really begin to look at these stims as resources. Because in sensory motor psychotherapy, when we work with people with trauma, we really begin to resource people from the very beginning of treatment. Body-based somatic approaches and somatic psychology as applied to autism really have a lot to do with this same sort of heart stance of, I see the wisdom and the power in you and your body. And like for me, it's this, right? I'll do this sometimes. I won't even be thinking about it, and I'll just be doing this. And it's like you can see it very close if you look very closely, right? Like I move my hand like this, and it's very resourcing for me. It's not a thing I'm thinking about, but you could call this a stim. For me, it's a stim, but it also is very resourcing. Resourcing meaning it's giving back to me. This practice is self-reinforcing. And so we have these little things, right, that if we frame it as a resource and not a detraction, not some sort of drawback from our existence, we begin to see the power and the wonder that our autistic clients bring to the table. And so for me, this session is really meaningful because it comes out of my work in autism and polyvagal terms, which is due out on September 10th, 2024. It's hard to believe it's actually coming out finally, but it's really cool because it really joins. My hope is that this session and sessions like it will really begin to place this bridge between the mental health world and the developmental disability world. And the hope is with this book that people who treat trauma won't be so afraid to work with people with autism, giving greater access. I mean, for me, a real driver is access. As a person with autism, I'm very familiar with what it's like to not have that. I'm familiar with what it's like to not have access to healthcare because of a diagnosis. Yes, it sounds archaic, and I mean, the world's still a very archaic place. And so that's why we need solutions like this. We need polyvagal bends for working with autism. Also, PESI is putting out this really great neuroaffirming book. I don't really know anything about it, and they didn't ask me to do this. I just am really excited because as someone who knows most, I mean, there's only a handful of us writing in this vein, right? And so as someone who knows most of the authors in this vein, it's exciting to see that PESI, a major publisher, is putting forth a book on neuroaffirming or interventions. And so that's why I hope you'll come and see my talk, both of my talks in Chicago, and maybe consider purchasing either their book or my book. They're both great books. And, you know, because if we're really going to make a change in mental health care for people with autism, we really need to be thinking, how do I give access? And maybe my book's not the right fit, right? Maybe the PESI book with all the strategies, that's your thing. And so maybe you get that book and you come to my talk and you put this stuff together and you have this really beautiful blend in your clinical practice. Or maybe you want real like insight and, well, how do I look at an autistic nervous system? Then like maybe my book is your thing. But here's the beauty of it is like there's all these approaches. And if you come join us in Chicago, we can just tell you all about them. So I'm really excited to share with you and to see you there. Come say hi. I'm giving 2 talks on Friday. yeah, we can talk about the state of healthcare. We can talk about why these things are so necessary. So yeah, PESIS is the place to be here in Chicago. So come join us.